So welcome everybody. Society of Otolaryngologists of Nepal like to welcome you all in this webinar. So today the topic of webinar is principles of phonosurgery. Today we have two great panelists out here. One is our own friend Dr. Arun Kesi, who is a first laryngologist of Nepal. And today also we are so much privileged and honored to have the mentor of laryngology and voice globally. He is none other than Dr. Sachin Gandhi. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
So to introduce Dr. Arun Kesi, Dr. Arun Kesi, he is a consultant working in the Department of ENT and Head and Neck Surgery, Beer Hospital, NAMS. Dr. Arun Kesi has completed his training in ENT and Head and Neck Surgery from Institute of Medicine in 2012. And Dr. Arun Kesi, he did his fellowship in laryngology from Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital, Pune in 2019. He has also participated as a visiting physician program in the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary, Harvard Medical Boston, and House Clinic in Los Angeles, California. He is a member of Laryngology and Voice Association and also the member of Asia Pacific Laryngology Association. He is also currently working as an editor in Nepalese Journal of ENT and Head and Neck Surgery, and he has got more than dozens of publications in national and international journals. And to introduce our next panelist, I'd like to request Dr. Arun Kesi to introduce our next honorable panelist. Yeah. So Dr. Arun.
Thank you, Dr. Yogesh. First of all, I would like to thank Seoul Nepal and CIPLA for organizing this webinar. And it's an honor for us to have Dr. Sachin Gandhi with us. He needs no introduction. He's currently the director of Department of Laryngology at Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital. And he's a former founder president of Laryngology and Voice Association. He's the founder president of Asia Pacific Laryngology Association. And right now he's a mentor for a fellowship program, which is recognized by Royal College of Surgeons of England. And he has many publications in reputed journals. And we are very happy to have him with us. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Dr. Yogesh, can you make me a host so I can share my slide?
Now I think you're a host.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you start now?
Sure, Dr. Arun.
Okay, now I'm going to start. The topic of our presentation is principle of phonosurgery. Coming to the definition, phonosurgery is any surgical procedure that helps in the maintenance, restoration, or enhancement of voice with the rectification of the defects. And there are a wide variety of spectrum of procedures that is involved in phonosurgery. And in this webinar, what we have decided is we have divided phonosurgery in two parts. The first part today, we deal basically on phonomicrosurgery. And the second part will deal exclusively in injection laryngoplasty and framework surgery a couple of weeks later. And these are the different varieties of surgeries involved in phonosurgery, including a phonomicrosurgery, injection laryngoplasty, framework surgery, and nerve innervation. Going to the history of phonosurgery, Claudius Galen in the 2nd century, he identified the larynx as an organ for a voice production. And Morgagni in 17th century, he found that he correlated the pathology, voice pathology with dysphonia. And in 1854, Manuel Garcia, who is also known as a father of laryngology, he invented mirror indirect laryngoscopy. And in 1963, Godfrey Arnold and Hans von Leyden, they termed the coin phonosurgery. In 1968, Clint Sasser, also known as father of microdialysis surgery, he is actually basically an Austrian pathologist interested in otolaryngology. He did use all kinds of loops and microscope, and Clint Sasser is credited for the use of 400 millimeter lens, with what we use nowadays in the microscope. And in 1974, the Isiki, he popularized the different chiroplasties, different framework surgeries. Now, before doing any surgical procedures, especially the phono surgery, we should keep something in our mind that certain things have to be followed. First of all is the maximum non-surgical treatment modalities have to be followed, especially the medical treatments, voice, vocal hygiene, voice rest, and voice therapies. If these non-surgical modalities do not work, then we go for the surgery. And before surgery, both the patient as well as the surgeon should be knowing few parameters, including the timing of surgeries. The voice rest is basically required for 2 to 7 days, depending upon the surgery. A patient can resume full speaking after 7 to 30 days and can start singing from 30 to 90 days. Similarly, there are some things we have to consider before surgery, like we have to avoid conditions causing temporal vocal cord edema, especially the singing or shouting 1 week prior should be discouraged. And we should address the comorbid conditions like laryngopharyngeal reflux, allergy, upper respiratory tract infections. And we should also avoid operating during premenstrual period, because there is some chances of edema, or the tissue microvascular fragile is more during the menstrual period. And we should also, like other surgery, avoid aspirin and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. But another important aspect of phonosurgery is the informed consent. The patients should be well educated regarding their conditions, the procedure which they are being performed. There are various risks and benefits. Risks include the risks of general anesthesia, and the patients should have a regional expectation according to the disease. And patients should be knowing about the postoperative scarring, the permanent dysphonia, though rare, but sometimes phonosurgery may cause permanent dysphonia. And sometimes there is no significant improvement after the surgery. These are the things the patient should know. As a physician or as a treating doctor, we should make some decisions, especially preoperatively, since it's elective procedures, we shouldn't hasten to do the surgery. But when there is a dysphagia or any impending area embarrassment or risk for malignancies, we should do it as soon as possible. And the time comes in the entire operatively, we have to decide sometimes, like we should always avoid excessive resections, preservation of cover layer that includes the epithelium and lamina propria. And we should always judge between the repeat phonosurgery and permanent dysphonia. And I think everyone agree that a repeat phonosurgery is much better than having a permanent dysphonia. There are a few prerequisites for phonosurgery, like preoperative voice therapy. Preoperative voice therapy not only improves the voice, but it makes the foundation for postoperative management. For example, we teach the patient how to speak, talk, when to talk, and sometimes the patient may need postoperative voice therapy. Similarly, the psychological counseling is very important. Some patients are well known for their voice, so patients should be counseled regarding the voice outcome. And preoperative voice analysis, it can be either subjective or objective. Subjective includes voice handicap index, or GRABAS, like grading, roughness, breathiness, asthenia, and stress. This is actually evaluated by the trained pathologist, speech pathologist. An objective analysis like a voice analysis, for example, the multidimensional voice program, it helps to identify different parameters of voice like fundamental frequency, jitter, simmer, and so on. And this preoperative videolaryngoscopy should be done at least 1 to 3 weeks prior to the surgery, and it's best when we review the video laryngoscopy during the DF surgery, or even immediately prior to the surgery. Now, after going through all these parameters, when we select the patient for the surgery, the first thing that comes to my mind as a laryngologist or as a phonosurgeon is the exposure of the larynx. Because exposure of the larynx is so important that entire our outcome depends upon the exposure. And regarding keeping this in mind, the Piazza et al. In 2014, he described some parameters, pre-operative clinical predictors, which can which can predict the conditions where there is a difficult laryngeal exposure. For instance, he described 11 parameters, including the incisor gap, interincisor gap, theromental distance, upper abdominal status, and so on. And he, what he did was, out of 17 points, if the patient is getting more than 9, the chances of difficult laryngeal exposure is 67%. Similarly, if the score is more than 6, the difficult laryngeal exposure is 40%. And if it is less than 6, it is 6%. So this parameter is quite informative and handful. But this also has some limitations, especially it has some subjective variables. For example, meaning there is intra and intra-observer variation. Sometimes some surgeons may think there is a trismus, grade 2, some surgeons may not think there is a trismus. Some may think it's a macroglacia, some may not think it's a macroglacia. So it has some subjective variables. On top of that, it's cumbersome also. Taking 11 parameters in account is difficult as well. So Ekanda et al., they describe a mini laryngo score where they only took 3 parameters. And they found that these 3 parameters are equally good. They found that, and it's objective as well. They measure, we just need a scale or ruler. And when the incisor gap is more than 4 centimeter, the score is 0. When the incisor gap is less than 4 centimeters, score is 1. Similarly, the theromental distance, they also keep as one of the parameters, and same as for the upper jaw dental status. What they found was when the score is 0, the good laryngeal exposure is 93%. When it is score is 1, the good laryngeal exposure is 85%, and so on. And if it is 3, it's only 20%. So this helps us in some way that we can predict whether we're going to have a difficult exposure or not. This is a OT setup where the surgeon sit in the head end, assistant towards his right side, lasers, a microscope, and this is the position which we keep the patient. The muster table is very useful. Basically, when we put this stand over the chest, theoretically there is chance of difficulty in ventilation for the anesthesiologist, and so this muster table is very, very useful. Similarly, the fulcrum suspension is used. Louis or clean Sasser fulcrum suspensions are available. They help help in many ways. For example, we can use both hands. We have a better illuminations and so on. And gallows suspension is a modification for that. It has basically advantage over these fulcrum suspensions, especially these gallows suspension. They do not make fulcrum over maxillary teeth and the tongue. Anesthesia is a very, very important part, and we should always discuss with anesthesiologists, and we should always plan accordingly. There are various modalities of giving anesthesia. For example, a closed circuit where we can use a standard endotracheal tube. We can even use the microlaryngoscopy tube. You can see the difference between the standard tube and the microlaryngoscopy. It's a bit long. If you see, the diameter is almost same. It's around 5 millimeter, but the length is more. So this is used so that the visualization of the larynx is better. And we have a laser protective tube as well. This is a tube that we use in our hospital, B hospital. And second modality of anesthesia is intermittent apnea, where we remove the tube and we have a better exposure of the larynx. But basically, this is done for the short procedures, so 5 to 10 minutes procedures. But in some centers, they have claimed that they can do up to 20 minutes as well. But the intermittent apnea, when the saturation falls below 90 degree, we have to reintubate the patient through the laryngoscope. And another modality is a tubeless anesthesia, especially the SFNO, this is a high flow nasal oxygen, where around 12 liters of oxygen is given via nasopharyngeal tube. And recently, a new technology, Thrive, has come. This is the transnasal humidified respirator insufflation ventilation exchange. Here we can give up to 80 liters per minute, oxygen up to 80 liters per minute. And some studies, they have found that they can work without you approximately 30 to 40 minutes and so on. And the disadvantage of this is sometimes the vocal cord may move while doing surgery. And to overcome this, we can use Lindholm false call retractor. And this is commonly also done, this SFNO is also commonly done. Another modality is the jet ventilation. And it's not available everywhere, but it's very useful, especially when we are doing for long surgeries. And this gives a very good, because this is a slim catheter, so it gives a very good exposure of the larynx. Now, there are various laryngoscopes available in the market, and they have various uses as well. There are many classifications for laryngoscopes as well, but I find one classification is very easy, that is used for supraglottis. For example, supraglottis, the best is the Lindholm laryngoscope, and for the glottis, they say the Dido laryngoscope or Klein-Sasser laryngoscope. It's good. And for subglottis, it's the Benjamin laryngoscope. And anterior commissural laryngoscope also available. First, it was originally described by Hollinger in 1960. In this commissural scope, there is a constriction in the center, and this is the point where our teeth, maxillary and mandibular teeth, press on it. So we have a little bit area of flexibility. Widal laryngoscope is also basically good for the supraglottis. It is expanding. We just have to tune the screw and just access the larynx, especially the supraglottis. Now, coming to the position of the patient, basically we put the position of the patient is like we have to, there are basically three axes: the oral axis, pharyngeal axis, and laryngeal axis, where the main aim of the position is to make all these axes align together. So the best position is described by Severos-Jackson, which is flexion at the neck, which is around the cervicothoracic vertebra, and extension at the atlanto-occipital joint. With this, we can see with the flexion of the neck, the pharyngeal axis and laryngeal axis comes together. With extension of the neck, slowly this comes along with these axis. Oral axis comes along with the laryngeal axis. And during introduction of laryngoscope, we may find some difficulties, but the easiest way is to just follow the endotracheal tube. Initially, the posterior to the endotracheal tube, and you just go anterior to the endotracheal tube. Sometimes the epiglottis may be folded, and in such case, the exposure is not as good. Like there's a folded epiglottis, it's not difficult to visualize this area of the larynx. And sometimes we may need external or other instruments like cup forceps, just hold the epiglottis and see the larynx. These are various pictures showing different kinds of suspension laryngoscopy. This is the Gallows suspension, which I talked about. This is the Louis suspension. This is the armrest. It's ideally basically for the surgeons who have a tremor in the hands. Is a very good method of reducing the tremor. And this is a picture showing the endoscopes. And with different angle endoscope like 0 degree, 30 degree, and 70 degree endoscope is used to visualize the larynx. This is the ideal, this is the exposure what we need for doing any phonosurgery. And sometimes like this is enterocommission is not visualized, so we may need to give the pressure from outside, the cricket pressure. With the cricket pressure, we can visualize the even anterior commissure very nicely. And this is the position where there is the flexion. Sometimes flexion extension may not work, may not help to visualize the larynx completely. So we may need to do flexion procedures. While doing phonosurgeries, it's not always simple. Sometimes difficult things do happen during surgeries. And one of the most difficult thing is the difficult laryngeal exposures. This is a very important because our outcome depends entirely upon the exposure. And this is the algorithm. If we follow this algorithm, we may tackle the problem, but it's not always possible. But we can do maximum if you follow this algorithm. First, we have to change the position. Like I said before, it's a flexion extension. We change into flexion position, and we may need to do a turnover position so that we can use the microscope. If it doesn't work, then we have to use a different kind of laryngoscope. As I explained before, there are various types of laryngoscopes, and smaller laryngoscopes can be used. But the disadvantage of using a smaller laryngoscope is the loss of binocular vision. And sometimes even these doesn't work. Then what we need is a rigid endoscope, 30 degree, 0 degree and 30 degree, and sometimes even 70-degree telescopes is required with angle instruments. And during my fellowship, 1 year fellowship, laryngeal mask airway, and through the working channel, we passed the KTP laser and remove the polyps. And this is very difficult situation, but this is the last option we have for a difficult laryngeal exposure. There is a very good article published in Operative Techniques in Otolaryngology by Lee et al. In 2011, where he introduced the KTP laser through the bronchoscope. First, he anesthetized the larynx with the lignocaine. Then he passed this bronchoscope through the port of one of the ports of this LMA, and then he passed this KTP laser through the working channel of the bronchoscope. And with this, he could remove the polyps. But with this technique, we cannot do very wide range of surgeries, especially when we anticipate the bleeding or some difficult situations. There are standard microlaryngeal instruments. There are a list of instruments, but I would just like to focus a few instruments like scissors. These are curved scissors, Upton scissors. These are curved forceps. These Upton curved forceps is very, very useful. And similarly, we have atraumatic triangular forceps, Bosse's forceps. These are the alligator or the crocodile forceps, curved forceps. This is the blunt dissector. And this is very useful instrument. This is the Lindholm false chord retractor, and basically this helps the visualization of the subglottis and upper trachea, and sometimes even the vocal cord. Sometimes there is a hypertrophy of false chord where the vocal cord is not visualized properly. In those conditions, this is very useful. And this is the laryngeal braid which we have in our hospital. This is a micro divider, and we use basically this for the recurrent respiratory papillomatosis. Now, with the advent of technology and science, many instruments have been developed in past decades, and one of the most important tool is the laser. And I just want to briefly describe our laser. When the laser is a light amplification by stimulated emission radiation, when the laser falls on any surface, it's either absorbed or it's reflected, or some part of it gets transmitted. But the desired effect is by the absorption, and the side effect is basically by the either reflection or the transmission, or from the scatter of thermal damage. And absorption of a laser depends upon basically the type of tissue. Like whether it's rich in water or it's pigmented tissues, and the wavelength of the laser. For example, CO2 laser is best absorbed by the water. And similarly, if you see the KTP and pulse dye laser, they are better absorbed by the hemoglobins. So the absorption depends upon the type of tissue where you are working and the type and the wavelength of the laser. And larynx, the laryngeal tissues, most of them are water content. 95% of the water content. That's why CO2 laser is best for the larynx. Similarly, tissue penetration. If you see the tissue penetration, CO2 has even less than 1 millimeter. So the collateral damage with CO2 laser is very, very less. This is the laser what we have in our hospital, and this is the different parameters we use, like different shape of the beam, or the power, depth, everything we manage with this options, with this the screen. And with every good things, bad things also comes together. For example, the laser fire is very, very dangerous, and we should do all our best to prevent laser fire. For example, using either laser protective tubes, or tubeless surgery, or you ask anesthesiologists always to reduce FiO2 less than 30% while using laser. And laser is basically harmful for eyes and the skin as well. And so we need to cover the eyes of the patient, and the surgeons and the assistant and the people around should wear the goggles to prevent the damage to the cornea or the retina, or sometimes some lasers even damage the all three layers, the cornea, lens, and the retina. This is the video of laser using scanner mode. You can see how nicely it vaporizes the tissue layer by layer. This is basically, this is done for the spasmodic dysphonia, this thyroid myoneurectomy. Now going to the, before going to the disease specific, I just want to briefly highlight the anatomy of the larynx, especially the applied anatomy. Basically, there are 5 layers in vocal cord. The epithelium, stratified squamous epithelium, and then beneath that is the lamina propria, which has 3 layers: the superficial, the intermediate, and deep layer, and beneath that is the vocalis and thyroid muscles. And if you see the Hirano in 1974, he described the epithelium and the lamina propria as a cover layer and muscle as a body. And dimensions, the height of the epithelium is around 0.1 millimeter, and the superficial this lamina propria is 1 to 1.5 millimeter, and the muscle is around 5 to 6 millimeter. Since cover layer is very, very important for surgery, we have to protect the cover layer in all possible aspects, and we inject sometimes the normal saline or epinephrine in the lamina propria, so that the space becomes more. And there are various collagens, elastins, hyaluronic acids, decorin, micromodulin, fibromodulin, fibronectin. They are present in the lamina propria. Here you can see these are the collagen fibers, the reticular fibers, and in between them are the proteoglycans. Decorin is the proteoglycans is abundant in the superficial layer, whereas hyaluronic acid is responsible for the viscosity of the vocal cord, is present in the mostly in the middle layer, and in the collagen is abundant in the deeper layer. These are all responsible for the elasticity and pliability of the vocal cord. And these are more important because in the sense that these are irreplaceable. Many have tried many ways to replace it, but till now there is no answer. So nowadays they have even tried the stem cells, but we are yet to get the good results. Coming to the vascular anatomy, the major blood supply of the larynx is from the superior thyroid artery, which is followed by into superlaryngeal artery and cricothyroid branch of superthyroid artery, and some we get from the inferior thyroid artery. But these are all theoretical. Most important anatomy for us is the endoscopic anatomy. We should know where the arteries lies. For instance, this is the laryngoscope, and when involves the anterior commissure, here is the ascending branch of cricothyroid branch of superior thyroid artery, and when we are doing the corectomy, we may encounter the anterior division of descending branch of superior laryngeal artery. Now, any phonosurgery, the more surgeons should know the microflap technique. Is very, very important. The microflap technique needs patience, appropriate instruments, good surgical skills, and experience. And microflap technique is basically used for the subepithelial lesions, in which basically we incise over the lesion or just lateral to the lesion. Just raise the flap with the blunt dissector, and we feel the lesion all around, and then we just remove the lesion, maintaining the try to preserve as much as possible the cover layer, and we just trim the excessive tissue so that the middle edge of the vocal cord becomes straight. This is very, very important technique. Now coming to the disease specific vocal cord nodules, it's very common, especially common in patients who have history of vocal abuse or misuse. It's usually a bilateral symmetric, and it's present in the mid-membranous region. And in stroboscopy, you find the hourglass configuration. Like in this video, you can see this is the hourglass configuration. Here the mucosal wave is not that much disturbed, but still the bigger nodules, they may affect the mucosal waves. Non-surgical treatment is the first modality of treatment for any vocal cord nodules. Patients should undergo the voice therapy, and underlying medical conditions like LPR, allergy, UR should be treated. And if the patient does not respond to the non-surgical treatment, or patient is non-compliant for the non-surgical treatment, then patient may need surgery. And for surgery, we can use cold steel as well as the laser. And the most important thing is we should preserve the cover layer, that is epithelium, and this lamina propria as much as possible. And basically it's a hypertrophy of the mucosa, these vocal cord nodules. And sometimes if we remove more tissue, it will form a cookie by defect, and this is one of the cause of post surgery dysphonia. So we should always keep this in mind. Next common etiology is a vocal cord polyp. It's basically exophageal lesion with a thin mucosa, and basically it's a unilateral, but sometimes it can be a bilateral, and there is always dampening of mucosal waves, as you can see in this stroboscopy. So you can just notice that there is a decreased mucosal wave on the right side. In this also, the patient may have a history of phonotrauma, and the non-surgical treatment sometimes work, but it may not work all the time, especially the huge polyp, the hemorrhagic polyp. Non-surgical treatment may not work, and we can do either a microflap technique or truncated method. In truncated method, we just grasp the polyp with the atraumatic forceps and retract medially, and we just cut at the junction of the polyp and the vocal cord. And any dog ear deformity should be removed so that the middle edge of the vocal cord should be straight. And mucosa of polyp, they are very thin, and so it's not used, so we have to remove it. This is a video showing the removal of polyp using carbon dioxide laser. Here you can see the infusion of the infiltration of the lamina propria with the normal saline, and this helps. One is it absorbs the collateral thermal damage done by the laser, and it also helps to make the lesion prominent and increase the space for work. Now, after setting the laser parameters, we grasp the polyp with the forceps, and then we have to dissect in this plane the laser. After removing this, so let's see, this is very important. First we have to remove this char, because this may act as a foreign body and which may result in vocal cord edema later on. Similarly, we have to remove this either by the cuff forceps or vaporize with the scanner mode of CO2 laser. Next common pathology in vocal cord is a vocal cord cyst. Vocal cord cyst is basically a sac-like structure within the lamina propria. It's basically unilateral, sometimes it's bilateral, and there is a reduced mucosal wave. Actually, this is not a cyst. If you see carefully, you think like this, we think it's like a cyst, but if you see this stroboscopic finding, it's a pseudocyst. Pseudocyst meaning there is no covering. See the mucosal waves of the vocal cord. It's very almost normal, and it's in the inferior edge of the vocal cord. So this patient may not have that much problem in the voice, but the patient may strain for the voice. Like any other microflap technique, we just give incision over the lesion and raise the flap and remove and just trim the excess mucosa and make this middle edge at the straight line. And non-surgical treatment has a very limited role in case of cyst. And there is a slow post-operative recovery, especially when it involves the deeper layer of the lamina propria, especially the vocal ligament. Another common pathology is the Rimke's edema. It's also known as the polypoid chorditis. The patient has dysphonia, especially they have a lower pitch because the mass, increased mass, the pitch is lowered, especially troublesome for the female patients. It's exclusively found in smoker, around 97%, and other associated factors like LPR and phonotrauma may be there. And usually it's a bilateral, global meaning involving entire the vocal cord, and the gelatinous amorphous material is deposited in the lamina propria. And basically it's a bag-like structure which prolapsed in failure with the inspirations. This can also managed by microflap technique or laser, which can CO2 laser, and sometimes in office setting we can even use a KTP laser. And the patient should be counseled regarding the post-operative course, especially the patient may have a breathiness and high pitch because the loss of mass, and the patient usually takes longer recovery period, approximately 6 to 8 weeks. Another pathology which is very challenging for all laryngologists is a respiratory papillomatosis. Basically, it is a growth in epithelium layer, and it has a predilection over the transition sites. Like there's a transition between the stratified squamous epithelium and the respiratory epithelium, that is stratified columnar epithelium. It's basically caused by the human papillomavirus 6 and 11, and they have a high recurrence rate. Especially this strain 11 is more virulent and aggressive than this 6. And conservative surgery, you have to be very, very conservative. We have to follow all the principle of conservative surgery for this kind of disease, because we cannot treat the disease with the surgery. We are only making the patient symptomatically better. And we should always avoid tracheostomy, because doing a tracheostomy is making other epithelial transections. So we should try our best to avoid tracheostomy. And different modalities of treatment like CO2 laser in low power mode, and KTP lasers can be used. But these lasers take a long time. So microdivider is used nowadays quite frequently, and followed by the CO2 laser. For fine tuning, CO2 laser is used. And sometimes the patient may have recurrent diseases, so sometimes they may need adjuvant therapies. For example, cidofovir can be given intralesionally. We get around 10 milligram per ml, and we have to give once monthly for at least 3 to 4 months. And Avastin is a monoclonal antibodies against endothelial growth factor. And one article published by Chaital, he used the KTP laser and the Avastin, and he found that the rate of recurrence is low with the use of KTP laser and Avastin. Vaccines are also available, quadruple vaccines involving strain 6, 11, 16, 18 also is available. Whether this prevents respiratory papillomatosis is a subject of debate, but some studies have found that even after disease, use of vaccine has reduced the rate of recurrence. Fat augmentation, this is another commonly done surgery. Basically, is done for the paralysis, unilateral vocal paralysis, sulcus vocalis. Sulcus vocalis can be 3 types. Either is type 1 or physiological. Type 2 involves the ligament, and type 3 involves the muscle. And there you can see the video of sulcus vocalis. If you see nicely, there you can see this is the type 2 sulcus. And if you see more closely, if you observe closely, you can see type 1 on the left side as well. And this is better seen in the stroboscopy. See if you observe closely, the mucosal wave is restricted on the right side, and there is some mucosal wave on the left side, and there is a phonatory gap leading to the. This is called the snake dance experience. And fat, we basically use the abdominal fat. Either you can directly harvest fat from the abdomen. It's very easy procedure, 5 minutes procedure, or you can do liposuction from the abdomen. And we have to inject a deep, because we should avoid injecting over the lamina propria or injecting the subglottis. So these basically inject just lateral to the vocal process arytenoid, and overcorrection is mandatory because some of the fat leaks while taking down the needle, and the fat is really absorbed by the body as well. And when the vocal cord mobility is restricted, there may be an issue of airway obstruction, which we should always be aware of. I just show you the video of fat augmentation. This is the needle, and this just inject just lateral to the vocal process. You just feel the giveaway. That's the giveaway, and then you slowly inject the fat. Yes, we have to always overcorrect the fat, and slowly we have to remove the needle very carefully. Otherwise, the fat will come out with this. This is inside. Atrial gamma is not that common, but we frequently come across it, also known as intubation granuloma. There's a history of intubation, laryngopharyngeal reflux, or voice abuse. A patient may present with hoarseness of voice, and sometimes even painful speaking, also known as odinophonia. And we should always discuss regarding the high recurrence rate of this disease. We should always explain the patient regarding the high recurrence. And the first line of management is non-surgical modalities, which includes the proton pump inhibitor, voice therapy. Sometimes we can even use Botox. For example, we can use 5. If you are using in a single cord, we can use up to 10 units. If you are using both cords, we can use up to 5 units of Botox. And if they don't respond to the surgery, or when it causes the respiratory obstruction or we only suspect malignancy, we have to do surgery. There is a debate whether to do cold surgery or laser surgery, because laser surgery may produce the thermal damage to the perichondrium of arytenoid, and some say cold steel is not good enough. What is either you can do, and you can also inject the steroid to prevent the recurrence. After all this, post-operative care is equally important, and we should always ask the patient to avoid screaming, throat clearing, whispering, and humming. And there should be a voice rest for approximately 2 to 7 days, depending upon the surgery, what kind of surgery the patient undergoes. The patient may have a light voice after 7 to 10 days. Light voice meaning 5 to 10 minutes of talk per hour, and patient can resume singing after 3 to 4 weeks. And patient needs a lot of hydrations, and we should always control the reflux, and we should always educate the patient regarding the alternate method of communication, for example, a whistle or a bell or email, sometimes even text. No surgery is immune to complications. Likewise, the phonosurgery, we have certain complications like dental injuries. This can be avoided if we use a dental guard, or if you avoid making teeth as a fulcrum. And sometimes actually phonosurgery doesn't cause temporal joint disorder, but it may aggravate the pre-existing disease. So we have to refer to the maxillofacial surgeon. Bleeding, sometimes if we incompletely remove the RRP, there might be bleeding, but most of the bleeding during phonosurgery is controlled by this epinephrine adrenal impact. If you pack adrenaline and wait for 3 to 5 minutes, most of the bleeding gets stopped. Another important issue is the lingual anesthesia discretion. Basically, this is for the prolonged surgeries exceeding more than 1 hour, and it's basically temporary. It occurs in 10 to 20% of the cases, and it recovers in 2 weeks. Maximum it takes 4 weeks. This is like it's not a complication. It's like patient having abdominal pain after appendectomy. So some surgeons, they don't take it as a complication. And post-operative dysphonia, this is the thing which we should worry about. Various causes of post-operative dysphonia, for example, vocal cord scar or vocal cord edema. There may be a non-adherent flap, or sometimes recurrence. A vocal cord scar we can prevent if we preserve the cover layer, and sometimes we may need to inject the steroid intraoperatively, or patient should give the patient steroid post-operatively. Vocal cord edema, it may be due to poor control of laryngopharyngeal reflux, or poor compliance of voice raise, vocal hygiene, and sometimes foreign body, for example, charring, what we get after using lasers. And non-adherent flap, basically maybe due to the fenestration of microflap, and the recurrence is always there when there is incomplete excision, or there is a poor control of the laryngopharyngeal reflux. We should always address the unrealistic expectations of the patient. Basically, this is due to the poor communication with the patient. If we counsel the patient, and if you follow certain the norms, this can be addressed. Finally, I would like to thank Dr. Sachin Gandhi, who is my mentor, and my friend Dr. Dushyant, Dr. Suprita, and Dr. Subhas Bhatt for helping me to present this presentation. And I would also like to thank Dr. Yogesh for helping me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arun. Thank you so much. Can we have Dr. Sachin Gandhi to comment on such a wonderful presentation by Dr. Arun?
Yes, definitely. I'm very happy. Congratulations, Dr. Arun. I think
Thank you, sir.
it was most explanatory, and it involved all the points which a phonosurgeon has to keep in mind before naming himself and his clinic as a phonosurgery clinic. I think very well done. And
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
We are going to evolve, and we'll have some series of cases from you in what you say, as early as possible, maybe. So, congrats. Yes, yes.
There are some questions. Thank you, sir. There are some questions.
Yeah.
Just I would like to read some questions. One is the first one is by Fazali White. So, in case of bilateral recurrent large nerve during thyroidectomy, what is the treatment option as observed thyroid performed by general surgeon regards? Basically, this is not the topic, but what we do is if you are sure that you have injured both recurrent laryngeal nerve and there is no chance of recovery, we should intervene. And what we usually do is the posterior correctomy with partial areotonectomy for this kind of situations. Dr. Gurung has asked, would you suggest complete voice rest? How is the patient compliance for voice rest in your experience? Yeah, this is a very good question because the voice rest is a subjective matter. For a certain patient, the voice rest is just speaking little is a voice rest, but it's a subjective matter. Actually, it depends upon the patient, it depends upon the surgery, and it depends how well you have counsel. But we should at least for a couple of days, 1 or 2 days, we should ask the patient for the voice rest. She has asked another question. Do you use Thrive when using laser? Yes, we can use Thrive, but we have not used Thrive. I think Dr. Rakesh Srivastav from Lucknow, he has used Thrive for laser surgeries as well. And yes, there are specific laryngoscope for children as well. For example, the Parsons laryngoscope, there is one laryngoscope, Parsons laryngoscope. It's basically for the children.
But Dr. Arun, the Parsons, I think it is basically for diagnostic purpose than for using instrument, something like that.
Yeah. The Parson has this working slot as well.
Yeah.
There is one space. This space is there for working as well. So I think it can be used for therapy as well.
So there is another question. Okay.
In which Dr. Rishi has asked, in which case do you use microflap technique regarding vocal polyp? Can it be done? Yes, microflap technique is basically done for the subepithelial lesions and for vocal cord polyp also it can be done. But we usually prefer for polyp, basically microflap technique prefer for a cyst. Usually the vocal polyp we do the truncated method using either the laser or the scissors. Dr. Urmila has again asked, how long should smoking be stopped prior to doing surgery? As such, there is not much documented evidence regarding this, but we always ask the patient preoperatively as well as postoperatively to stop smoking because it hampers in the wound healing. Is Cidofovir available in Nepal? I'm not aware of this Cidofovir because we also tried to inject in India also, but I think there is some issues regarding the approval from the DDA drug administrations.
Yeah, I just have one question to Dr. Gandhi, sir. Sir, because we see a lot of recurrent just like RRP out here in our part of the world, which is very, very extensive, sir. And we try to divide it every monthly or every after 15 days, sir. So we have tried a lot of injecting MMR vaccine and also. So is injecting intralesional injection of SPV may work in this without typing it?
Injecting which actually what we
human papilloma virus vaccine, sir.
Which virus vaccine?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not aware of any such center or any literature on this. What we practice and maybe some centers have given good results is Avastin, injecting Avastin locally after removal of the papilloma, because it blocks the blood vessels and helps the mucosal spread of the papilloma virus, and that's all. So maybe most what do you say available thing and mostly practice giving good results is Avastin with available, if available, KTP laser, but other things also would do. And Cidofovir, actually the company itself says is Cidofovir is not manufactured for papilloma. It's basically
Yes.
for retinitis pigmentosa. So basically it's
Mhm.
ophthalmic indication. So there are, and anyhow it's not available in India or anywhere in the world. And in European countries also, European Laryngology Society has sent letters to all the members of it
Okay.
to keep in this mind. This may become medical legal issue. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Dr. Kunjan has asked, how do you diagnose a spasmodic dysphonia and treat it? Basically, spasmodic dysphonia is diagnosed clinically, and if you do stroboscopy, you don't find much, but there is a, you can see the spasm of the larynx, but this is the clinical diagnosis. But just by hearing the voice, we diagnose this spasmodic dysphonia. And he also asked, how do you treat it? The gold standard treatment for this spasmodic dysphonia is still the Botox. But the compliance, because Botox is temporary, the compliance of the patient gets poorer every time we inject Botox. So what we used to do is we used to do the thyroidnoid myonerectomy for these kind of patients using CO2 laser, and we just ablate the muscle, we just vaporize the muscle, and we just ablate the nerve, and it has good result as well. And this is published in the literature as well by Dr. Gandhi, using the thyroidal management as a treatment modality for spasmodic dysphonia. I think he can tell me more about this, sir.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in the meantime, Dr. Arun, can you transfer the host to Sangaji so that he'll be doing all those works? Okay, sir, please.
Okay, sure.
Sir, you can go on, sir. Just
Actually, thyroid myrectomy, basically Botox is maybe is chemo denervation. So we use a chemical to just block the nervous impulses, neuromuscular activity. When you use thermal blockage of the neuromuscular activity, that is laser. So we use laser for the same actually results as the Botox would give. But what we have seen, and we have presented and published our results over 10 years now, the effectivity of thermal or laser myonerectomy are bit longer, and we have followed our own patients. Around 70% of the patients have more than 3 years resolving their symptoms of spasmodic dysphonia, mainly the efforts in putting in the speech and maybe the speech defects, that is interval speaking. So I think this is improved a lot and for quite a long period with the laser myonerectomy.
Dr. Bimal Sinha has asked one question. It's for you, sir, actually. Hello, Dr.
Yeah.
Gandhi. Have you started doing laryngeal surgery at Pune? If yes, please tell us briefly what precautions are you adopting during this pandemic, sir?
Yes, we have started doing laryngeal surgery. Basically, we started for emergency airway obstruction as well as some oncological indications, laryngeal malignancies. The precautions is basically when you are doing a laser surgery with microlaryngoscopy, you are at harm with two. One is the aerosols or the leak of the ventilation, and number two is the plumes of the laser. So with this, you will have to protect yourself by wearing a PPE, personal protection equipment. Try to reduce the aerosols with putting in endotracheal tube and not using apnea technique, any spontaneous ventilation, or tube in tube out method. So tube has to be there with cuff inflated and packed with a roller gauze strip to prevent any aerosol leak. And number two, to prevent the plumes which may contain virus, you have to use double suction method So all the plume is removed and it would not come and may injure your conjunctiva or maybe nasal mucosa. So these are the two basically enemies while doing microlaryngoscopy with laser. One is aerosol and second is the plume.
Okay. One question is by Professor Dipendra Shrestha. What is the importance of hydrodissection in phonosurgery? Yeah, as I explained before, the size of lamina propria is just 1 to 1.5 millimeter. With doing hydrodissection, we expand the lamina propria, so we damage less to the cause less damage to the lamina propria. Other thing is if you use a laser, there is always a collateral thermal damage, and this hydrodissection also prevents the thermal damage. And in case of malignancy also, sometimes when you inject, when you cannot lift the lesion, it's like indirect evidence of malignancy as well. There's a deep infiltration of the lesion into the vocal cord. So these are the importance of hydrodissection in bone surgery.
Just a minute, Arun.
Yes.
I just want to tell all the literature or the presentations are available on Laryngology and Voice Association website for video laryngoscopy, ML-scopy laser surgery, and tracheostomy during COVID pandemic. So anybody interested can just go on to that website and the presentations are available there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the information.
One more important question is that how do you address post-operative scars and vocal cords?
Okay, the prevention is better than a cure is best applied in this case. The preventing the scar is much more important than treating the scar. As I've told before, how there are various ways of preventing the scar, but once the scar is formed, it's very difficult to treat. Scarring is one of the most difficult things to treat in laryngology, and there are various things we can do. What we do is like if we get the postoperative scar, we release the scar and we augment the fat, and there are some studies where they're going on where they use the stem cells. I think Gani sir, I think he can explain better than me regarding this, the treatment of the scar, sir.
Yeah, I think if the scar is diagnosed quite early, especially post-operative period, then maybe the first thing you can try is local injection of any steroids. That may reverse if it is diagnosed quite early. But if it is established scar, maybe 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the line, patient comes with a scar and changed voice, then as Arun has already said, it's very difficult to treat these scars. You have to just release the scar and inject various materials. Fat augmentation is just for medialization and closure of the glottic chink. But if you want to grow the lamina propria or the gelatinous material, which would, so it is called as soft tissue regeneration. If you want to regenerate the soft tissue, which can produce mucosal waves, then there are various injections available in the market. One is hydroxyapatite. If not, then actually we are doing a research project on soft tissue regeneration, and we are using another product that is called as gelagen. So it is jellyfish collagen and stem cells. Results are maybe we'll have to wait for another year to go, because it's just in the phase 1 of animal study. But as he has rightly pointed out, to prevent having a scar, especially after the surgery, you have to remain quite superficial. Number 2, you can inject steroid immediately. I mean, during the, as you complete the excision, you can inject the scar to prevent further scar formation, and then it's hope for the best.
Thank you, sir. So there is one more question, sir. If how to prevent and manage anterior glottic management is a different, I think, anterior glottic waving. So how do we prevent it and manage it? The question is, I think, pretty really long, but in short, sir, how we prevent and manage the anterior glottic waving?
See, when the lesions extend, basically there are two lesions I can foresee. One is the papillomas, and another is maybe malignancy. So these two things can involve the anterior commissure. And when you have to really excise this, you have to just see to it you are not going to injure the anterior commissure itself. Either you keep behind the papillomas there. In case of malignancies, yes, you can go ahead with the surgery. But again, prevention after 1 week and 3 weeks following surgery, you have to remove the slough in the anterior commissure because of the laser thermal damage. This slough has to be removed endoscopically to prevent any secondary infection and anterior web formation. So number one, avoid surgery in the anterior commissure. If like in papillomas, you can leave behind papillomas in the anterior commissure. But in malignancies, you have to excise and do chordectomy. Then to prevent anterior web formation or scar formation, you have to do endoscopy, flexible endoscopy after 1 week and 3 weeks and remove the slough in the anterior commissure to prevent this slough getting secondarily infected and forming a scar. Now, if scar is formed, then if it is iatrogenic, then generally it's a thick web or thick scar. And to remove that, you have to excise it with the laser in a V-shaped manner and then insert a keel to avoid reformation or recurrence. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think most of the questions has been answered, sir, and most of the question has been already answered. Yeah, Dr. Arun, is that so?
Yeah, yes, I think most of the questions have been answered.
Yeah, I think the most of the things has been answered, and so there is one of the suggestion from Dr. Subhas also. See surgery and exercise first the lesson and wait. Okay, as Saraj mentioned. So I think it was a very wonderful presentation by Dr. Arun and especially some highlights from Dr. Gandhi. And most of the participants had already replied us saying that it was very wonderful, giving the insight of the phonosurgery, and they are eagerly waiting for part 2 also, Dr. Arun. So
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Arun, and thank you, sir, for joining us. And I'll also like to thank CIPLA for organizing this, and hope to see all of us again very soon, sir.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yogesh.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah.